The city of Kauros. Nine never slept and never cared, and the streets were always full of lights, noise, and rushing people from every world across the galaxy. But no one noticed a small figure, sitting in the shadows near a wall between two buildings where the wind was sharp and cold, and the air smelled like fuel and metal. She was a child, and her skin was soft purple with silver marks under her eyes, and her tiny arms were wrapped around her knees. As she shook from the colder clothes, were only thin fabric torn at the edges and too small to keep her warm, and every few seconds she looked around with wide eyes, afraid that someone would see her and take her back. The people walked by quickly, some with heavy boots, some floating on hover plates, others wrapped in shiny clothes that lit up in blue and red, but none of them even turned their heads toward her, because she was just another lost thing in the dirty lower levels of the city. Then came a man with dark boots, a heavy coat, and a tired face. His name was Marcus Hale, a human ex-soldier who now worked as a trader, and he had seen many strange things in his life. But when his eyes fell on the little alien girl, shaking in the shadows, something inside him stopped moving. He walked past her at first, just like the others, but then he slowed down and turned his head and looked again, and what he saw made him pause, because her eyes were staring straight at him, not asking for help, but simply waiting, as if she already knew no one would care. He stepped closer and crouched down, and his voice was rough and quiet when he said, "Are you all right?" But the girl did not answer. She only flinched and curled tighter, as if afraid he might hurt her, and that made something twist in his chest. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped ration bar and offered it to her. She looked at it, then at him, then slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers were shaking and cold, and she held the bar like it was a piece of treasure. Marcus stayed there for a moment, watching her try to open the wrapper with weak hands, and without thinking he took off his coat and wrapped it around her small shoulders, and she froze for a moment, then looked up at him with those big silver eyes full of something he couldn't name. The coat was big and heavy and swallowed her tiny frame, but her shaking stopped a little, and she held it close like it was the warmest thing she had ever felt, and maybe it was. He sat down beside her, even though the ground was cold and wet, and asked what her name was, but she did not answer. She only whispered something in a language he did not understand, and then curled up again under the coat. He looked around and saw no one watching, but deep inside he felt like someone was, and it made the back of his neck itch like a sniper's aim or an old memory from the war. He knew he could walk away and leave her there like everyone else had, but the thought of doing that made his stomach turn, and for a long time he said nothing and just sat there while the lights above flickered and the cold wind moved around them like a ghost. After a while he stood up and held out his hand. She looked at it, then at his face, and slowly reached out her own hand to take, as it was small and cold, but it gripped as like it was holding on to life itself. He led her down the alley and back toward his ship, a small cargo freighter parked in Dock 9, not far from the marketplace. The crowd stared a little, but not for long, because strange things happen all the time on Kauros 9, and no one liked to get involved. When they reached the ship, he opened the door and let her inside. The lights were warm, and the air smelled like engine oil and recycled water, but compared to the streets it felt like a palace. He gave her a blanket and some warm food from the auto cooker, and watched as she ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. And then she curled up in a corner of the small sleeping cabin, still wearing his coat, and fell asleep in minutes. Marcus sat down in the pilot's seat, staring at the control screen, but not really seeing it, because his mind was spinning with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did someone like her end up alone in the cold like that? He didn't know yet, but deep inside he felt something strange and powerful, something he had not felt in years, not during the war, not after the war, not even during the long quiet nights spent drifting from one job to another. He had no idea that giving her his jacket would change everything, not just for her, but for him too, and that this was only the beginning of something far bigger. The small ship hummed softly as it floated above the docking bay floor, its lights casting a warm orange glow across the metal walls and ceiling inside the ship. The air was warmer, the silence calmer, the chaos of the city left far behind for now. The girl slept curled under Marcus's coat, her breathing soft and slow, her small hands still holding onto the edges of the thick fabric like it was the only thing keeping her safe in the world. Marcus sat across the room, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on her face, while questions spun in his head again and again. He had fought in 3 wars. He had seen more than most men ever would. But this child, this fragile, quiet alien girl, had shaken him more than any battlefield ever had. She had said something in another language, and he had no idea what it meant, but there was fear in her eyes and sadness deeper than any words could hold. The auto cooker beeped again, and he stood up slowly, walking over to grab the steaming bowl of nutrient stew. He brought it back to her side and placed it on a small tray next to the bed, then knelt down beside her and waited as the scent of warm food began to drift through the cabin. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking in the dim light, then focusing on him and the bowl. He said in a calm voice, "Eat. It will help you get stronger." She stared at him for a long moment, then sat up slowly, still wrapped in the coat. She looked at the bowl, and then at him again, then picked it up carefully with both hands, and took a small sip, then another, and another until the bowl was almost empty, and her shoulders had relaxed a little more than before. He waited until she finished, then asked again, gently, "What is your name?" The girl looked down at the floor, her mouth moved, but no sound came. Then she whispered something soft, so soft he barely heard it. He leaned closer and said again, "What is it?" And this time she said it a little louder. "Arya." "Arya," he repeated slowly, letting the name settle in his mind. It felt light and fragile like glass, but there was strength in it too, hidden under the fear. He gave her a small nod and said, "I'm Marcus." Her eyes blinked, and then she looked at him more directly, her silver eyes steady and clear. He reached into a storage locker and pulled out a small translator band. He adjusted it and held it out to her. She looked at it, not sure what to do, and he pointed his own wrist where he wore a similar one, then motioned for her to try. She hesitated, but then took the band and slipped it on her wrist. It blinked once and synced with the ship systems. "Try speaking now," he said. She looked uncertain, then tried again, slowly. "My name is Arya." The band blinked green, and her voice came through clear, though still soft and cautious. His eyes widened slightly, and he gave her a nod. "It works. Good job. Now tell me, Arya, where are you from?" Her face changed the moment he asked her that. Her shoulders tensed, and her hands pulled the coat tighter around her. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for a moment Marcus thought she would go silent again. But then she whispered, "I don't know. I don't remember. It was dark. I was running. They were chasing me, the dark men." Marcus frowned and leaned back against the wall. "Who are the dark men?" he asked softly, but Arya only shook her head and said, "I don't know. They took the others. I ran. I hid. I waited for many days. No food, no water. Then I found the street." Marcus looked at her closely, his old instincts telling him this was bigger than it seemed. Children didn't survive alone in the underlevels of Kalros. 9, not without help, and definitely not for many days. Something about her didn't add up, and yet he couldn't doubt her eyes. Those eyes had seen something terrible. He stood and walked to the console to check the news feeds. He wanted to know if anyone had reported a missing child or a security breach or something strange. But nothing came up. No alerts, no faces matching Arya, no bounty notices, nothing that explained who she was or why she had been so alone. He turned back to her and said, "I think you're in danger, Arya, and I think someone is looking for you." She nodded slowly and said, "I know. I feel in my mind. They're close. They're watching. They want me back." His skin crawled at those words because there was no fear in her voice, just quiet knowing, like someone who had already accepted the truth, and that made him even more uneasy. He walked over and knelt in front of her again. "Arya, I don't know who you are or what's going on, but I won't let them take you back. Do you understand? You're safe here for now." Her lips trembled for a second, and then something happened. She reached forward and touched his hand lightly. Her fingers were small but strong, and her eyes met his with something new in them. Trust. Not full trust, maybe, but the beginning of it. And Marcus knew in that moment he had crossed a line without even thinking about it. He wasn't just helping a lost kid anymore. He was protecting her. He was stepping into something far deeper than he had planned. And his old training whispered that this would not end simply. He stood up and said, "Come on, let's find you something better to wear than my old coat." He took her to the back storage room and opened a crate with old clothes from past missions and travels. They were all adult size, but he managed to find a jumpsuit that could be folded and pinned to fit her small frame. She changed behind a curtain, and when she came out he smiled a little because the coat still hung on her shoulders. She looked up and said, "Can I keep it? It is warm." He nodded. "Of course, it's yours now." Later that night, while she slept again in the small bed, Marcus sat at the console and watched a loop of external cameras. Something felt wrong. He zoomed in on a figure near Dock 9, a man, standing too still too long, wearing a long coat and speaking into a comm device. Marcus didn't like it, not one bit. He had learned long ago to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming now. He shut off the feed and looked back toward the sleeping child in the next room. She had said they were watching, and now he believed her. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes just for a second, but his hand stayed near the emergency blaster under the console, and his mind was already planning 3 exit routes and 2 fallback positions just in case. Tomorrow he would try to learn more about where she came from. Tomorrow he would find someone who could help decode the strange symbols burned into the lining of the coat she had been wearing. When he found her tomorrow, the fight would begin. But for tonight, they were still safe for tonight. She was just a child in a jacket, and he was just a tired soldier who had made a choice, one that could not be undone. Asked ChatGPT. The morning came quickly with a low hum from the ship's systems and soft yellow lights, filling the small room. Arya was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, still wrapped in the big jacket, her silver eyes watching the door. Like she had not slept at all, her fingers were gripping the sleeves tightly, and her body was still tense, like she expected someone to come through the wall at any moment. Marcus walked in with 2 metal cups, steam rising from them, and handed one to her. It was warm synth tea, a calming drink he often used during long missions. She took it carefully, holding it close like it was something precious, and sipped slowly while her eyes never left his face. He sat beside her, not saying anything for a moment, just watching her breathing, trying to understand this strange child who had appeared in his life from nowhere. Arya spoke softly after a while. "They are still close. I can feel them. They dream of fire. They move in shadows. And they want me back." Marcus looked at her, his face hardening. He knew enough to trust that kind of fear. It wasn't normal, not from someone this young. Something had been done to her. Or maybe something had awakened in her. He didn't know yet. But she was not just a lost alien girl anymore. He stood and walked to the control panel, checking the outer cams again. The figure from last night was gone, but the Bay record showed increased activity since he brought Arya. On board, more ships, arriving, more movement. Near dock 9, more noise than usual for this time of cycle. It was too much to be chance someone had noticed or someone had reported her. Suddenly the ship rocked slightly. A knock on the hull came sharp and direct, followed by the voice of a dock official outside. "Routine inspection. Sir, we've had a security alert. All vessels are to be checked. Please open up." Marcus looked at Arya, who had already moved into the hidden panel behind the cargo crates. It was small and dark, but it had oxygen flow and enough space for her to hide. He gave her a nod and then opened the hatch. 3 men stepped in, 2 in dock security armor, and 1 in civilian clothes with a scanning visor and a data pad. The civilian looked around slowly, as if expecting something strange. Marcus kept calm, his tone easy. "Just doing maintenance and waiting for a shipment. What's the problem?" The man with the visor said, "We have reason to believe an unauthorized passenger entered this dock last night, possibly a child alien in appearance, very rare skin markings." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I don't know anything about that. Been on board all night alone, haven't seen any kids." The men searched the room, slowly opening panels, lifting crates, walking through the narrow hallway toward the back. They checked everything except the hidden panel, where Arya held her breath, not moving a muscle, not making a sound. The visor man paused for a long second, right near the panel, but then moved on. After 10 long minutes, they left the ship, and Marcus sealed the hatch again. Breathing slow and heavy, he walked back to the crate and opened it. Arya crawled out, her face pale and her hands shaking, but her eyes were steady. He knelt down and put his hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You did good, very good, but we can't stay here, not anymore." He sat at the console again and opened a private channel to an old contact, a smuggler named Juno, who owed him a favor from years ago. Juno was risky, loud, and often careless, but he had the right ship and knew how to disappear better than anyone else in the sector. When the signal connected, Juno's face filled the screen, half lit by green lights and smoke in the background. Marcus explained the situation, quickly keeping it simple and short. "A child hunt at high risk, need extraction." Juno whistled low and said, "You sure you want this mess, brother? This smells like old war secrets and new government lies." Marcus replied, "Just get here, I'll pay whatever it takes." Juno agreed and said he'd be there in 6 hours. Marcus turned off the screen and turned to Arya. "We leave tonight, no more hiding, no more waiting." She nodded, but her voice was thin. "What if they catch us? What if they take me back?" Marcus looked at her and said, "They won't, because I won't let them." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Marcus packed light, just what he needed to survive off-grid. Arya stayed close to him at all times, her small frame never leaving the reach of his sight. She helped where she could, and when she wasn't helping, she was watching, listening, learning fast. As the final hour came, Marcus activated the ship's stealth shield and lowered the heat signature to avoid scans. Juno's ship arrived above the docks, a sleek silver runner with wide engines and dark plating. It hovered silently, then sent a direct link request. Marcus responded and opened the top hatch for boarding. But before they could move, alarms blared across the dock. Warning lights flashed red, and automated messages began to shout, "All passengers remain in place, security lockdown in progress." Marcus cursed under his breath and grabbed Arya's hand. "We move now, stay close, do not stop, no matter what." They ran through the docking tunnel, moving fast, low, and silent. Blasters were drawn, voices echoed Behind them, heavy boots, hitting metal walkways. The security had found them, or worse, someone had tipped them off, maybe one of the dock officials, maybe someone who saw the child's face. Marcus and Arya reached the boarding hatch of Juno's ship. Just as two armored figures came around the corner, weapons raised. Marcus turned and fired fast, and cleaned 2 shots, dropped the guards, but the noise brought more. He shoved Arya into Juno's ship and followed behind, sealing the door, as gunfire echoed down the hall. Inside, Juno laughed wild and loud. You sure know how to make an entrance. Hail. Marcus ignored him and guided Arya to a seat, strapping her in and taking the co-pilot position. Go now, he ordered. Juno didn't wait. The ship roared to life, engines blasting down and up and through the sky of Kauros. 9 station weapons tracked them and fired. Arya closed her eyes and reached out with something deeper than hands or sight, and suddenly the ship's path cleared. Alarms failed, sensors glitched, and the pursuing ships lost target. Juno stared at her and whispered, "What the hell is that?" Marcus only said, "She's the reason they're chasing us." The moment passed, and the stars opened before them, empty and endless. They had escaped for now, but the weight of what just happened hung in the silence. Marcus turned to Arya and said, "You saved us." She looked at him and said, "I didn't mean to. It just happens when I get scared." He looked at her, then at Juno, and then at the stars beyond the glass, and he knew one thing with total certainty: this was no ordinary child, and their journey was only just beginning. The stars outside the ship were cold and bright and endless, like tiny eyes watching from the void, and inside the silence was heavy after the escape from Kauros. 9. Juno's ship drifted through dark space, running quiet, no signals, no light trails, just the soft hum of the engines and the slow blinking lights that marked life support systems. Marcus sat in the co-pilot chair, staring at the screen in front of him, but not really seeing it. His mind was far away, replaying the moment Arya reached out and made the enemy ships lose track of them, without touching anything, without speaking, just thinking, just feeling. Arya sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them, eyes wide and quiet and watching. She had not spoken since they jumped into deep space. She had not cried. Either just sat like a small ghost, wearing an old military jacket that swallowed her thin frame. Juno stood near the back of the ship, arms crossed, a half-smoked cigar hanging from his mouth, his eyes sharp and narrowed and full of questions. But he stayed quiet for now, because whatever just happened was not normal, and even Juno knew when to keep his mouth shut. Finally, Marcus turned to the girl and spoke, his voice calm but strong. "Arya, I need to know what you're not, who you are, but what, because I saw you do something back there that no one should be able to do." She looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes deep and ancient in a way that made his stomach twist. Then she nodded slowly and began to speak, her voice soft and broken and shaped by pain. "I was born on a world called Virelia. It is gone now. The cities burned, the skies broken, the people scattered. My kind was different. We could feel others, think we could touch minds. And sometimes, if we were strong enough, we could change small things, make someone stop, make someone forget, make someone feel something they had not felt before. But we were not monsters, we were not weapons, we were peaceful, we lived in balance with the world and with the stars. But then they came." She paused, her hands tightening around her knees, and her voice dropped lower. "They came in black ships with no flags and no names. They said we were dangerous. They said we had to be erased before we grew too strong, before we reached out beyond our home. They burned our temples, they hunted our people, they took children and locked them in dark places. I was one of them." Marcus felt his breath slow and his hands curl into fists. He knew those words too. Well, he had heard them before, during the war, when secret missions led to secret deaths, when orders came for voices no one could name, and left behind only ashes and silence. He asked quietly, "How did you escape?" Arya looked up, her eyes glassy. "I do not know. I was very young. I remember cold. I remember fear. I remember voices in my head that were not mine. Then one day the door was open, and no one was watching. So I ran, and I found a smuggler's ship and hid, and that ship landed on Kauros. 9. And then I was alone again until you." Juno finally spoke, stepping forward slowly, his voice low and serious. "Virelia is a ghost planet, Marcus. It was wiped clean during the Silent War. No records, no survivors. The few reports I've seen were buried deep enough that even I couldn't get the full files. And I get everything. And if this girl is from there, then she shouldn't exist, not anymore." Marcus nodded once, then looked at Arya. "Again, you said they can feel you. Do you think they're still following? Do you think they know where we are?" She nodded slowly. "I can feel them, sometimes like whispers, just behind my thoughts. They're searching not just for me, but for all of us, the ones who escaped, the ones who are hidden. They will not stop until we are gone." Juno turned and started pacing his hands, running through his messy hair. "This is bad, Marcus. This is real bad. You've pulled me into something way bigger than I thought. And I'm telling you right now, if they catch us, we won't get a trial, we'll get erased, just like our people." Marcus stood up, his voice steady. "Then we stay ahead of them, we find out what they're really after, and we protect her no matter what, because I didn't watch a planet burn for nothing. I didn't lose friends just to stand by while another child gets hunted down." Arya looked at Marcus, her lips trembling. "Why do you care? I am not human. I am not like you." He knelt in front of her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you're alive, and because no one else will, and because I made a promise the moment I gave you that jacket." The ship continued to move through the void, and the stars kept watching, and somewhere far behind in the black silence of space, a signal pulsed, a trace from a hidden beacon deep inside the lining of the old coat, one that Marcus had given her, not knowing it had been sewn with stolen tech from a fallen lab on Kauros. 9, a signal that whispered her location to ears that should never have heard it. And in that moment, in a dark chamber on a hidden station across the stars, a tall figure stood before a screen, watching her face, watching the signal, watching the future unfold in ways that could not be allowed. He turned and gave an order: "Send the collectors, bring her back alive or broken. It does not matter. She must not reach the others." Back on the ship, Marcus did not know about the signal, not yet. He only knew that the girl who should not exist now sat across from him, and that the fire in her eyes was something powerful and rare and dangerous, and maybe the last hope of a forgotten race. He knew the fight was coming, and that the next step would not be hiding, but running to find the truth, to find the others like her, if they were still alive. Arya whispered something, then barely loud enough to hear, but Marcus heard it, and it sent a chill through his spine. "They will burn the stars to find me, and they will burn you too, and I don't want to be the reason you die." Marcus looked at her and said, "Then we stop them before they light the match." And in the silence that followed, Juno just laughed, low and bitter and full of fear, because they all knew the same thing now. There was no going back. The stars moved slowly outside the small window as the ship drifted through silent space, the hum of the engine steady and low like a heartbeat in the dark. The silence inside the ship was thicker than before, not just from fear, but from understanding, from the weight of truth that now hung over them all. Arya sat near the back, her eyes closed, her breath, even her small hands resting in her lap, as she tried to control the storm inside her mind. Marcus stood in the center of the room, staring at a wall that held no answers, his jaw tight and his hands still. Juno had locked the controls and was pacing across the narrow floor, his boots thudding softly as he muttered to himself about stupid choices and cursed missions, and the fact that every time Marcus Hale showed up, things went from bad to worse faster than a warp jump. Finally, he turned and said with a sharp voice, "We need a plan, not a story, not a hope, not another speech. We need a real plan, because whatever is chasing that girl is going to catch up, and when they do, we're dead." Marcus turned slowly, and his voice was quiet but firm. "I know someone who might help, not a soldier, not a smuggler, someone who works off the grid, someone who knows how to hide people, not just in space, but in systems, who erases identities, who changes faces, who helps ghosts become shadows." Juno raised an eyebrow and said, "You mean the Ghostmaker, the one who burned his own name out of the registry?" Marcus nodded, "Yes, him." Arya opened her eyes and looked at them both, her voice soft but clear. "What is the Ghostmaker?" Juno answered before Marcus could. "A man with no past and no future. He deletes people for a living if you find him. And if he agrees to help you, then you disappear forever, even from the stars." Arya looked down and whispered, "Then maybe he can make me disappear too." Marcus looked at her, and his voice was gentler than before. "You don't need to disappear. You just need time to grow, to understand your gift, to learn how to protect yourself. But to get that time, we need to make the enemy forget where you are. We need to cut the signal that called them to us. And only the Ghostmaker knows how to do that." Juno set the course manually, since no one used coordinates for the Ghostmaker. Instead, they followed a string of hidden relays across dead sectors, abandoned stations, and silent beacons, until they reached a drifting freighter field, a place where old ships floated like bones in a graveyard, all cold and broken and empty, except for one, a dark vessel at the center, silent but alive. They docked without a word and stepped into the airlock. Marcus led with Arya. Beside him, Juno stayed close behind, blaster ready, though he hoped he would not need it. Inside the ship, the walls were dark, the air dry and full of dust, like no one had breathed it in years. But Marcus walked forward without fear until they reached a room lit by green lights and filled with screens and wires, and one man sitting in the center. He was old but not weak, his eyes sharp behind a cracked visor, his hands moving slowly across controls that blinked and hummed and whispered to him like old friends. He looked up and said in a voice like gravel, "Marcus, hail alive." And still dragging Ghost to my door, Marcus gave a small nod and said, "I need your help." The Ghostmaker stood and walked closer, his eyes landing on Arya, and narrowing instantly. He stared at her like he already knew everything, then said, "She is not human, not even close." And something in her is screaming to the stars, begging them to find her. Marcus said, "I know, that is why we need to make them deaf." The Ghostmaker walked around her slowly, examining her presence without touching. Then he nodded once and said, "I can break the signal, I can shut it down forever, but it will hurt and it will cost, and it might change her." Arya looked up at him and said, "I wanted to stop whatever it takes." The Ghostmaker led them to a small chamber deep inside the ship, filled with machines and strange lights. He connected wires to the coat, to the translator band, to a small chip behind Arya's ear that none of them had seen before, and then he began to process a pulse of data, a flood of memory, a silent scream that Arya could not hold back. Marcus watched helplessly as she shook and gasped and clutched to the sides of the chair, but never cried out, never begged to stop. She endured every wave, every scan, every moment, as the signal inside her was torn apart, until nothing was left but silence, true silence, for the first time since her escape. When it ended, she slumped forward, breathing hard, her skin damp with sweat, her hands trembling, but her eyes open and calm. The Ghostmaker stepped back and said, "It is done. The link is broken. She is invisible. Now, not even the Alliance can find her unless she wants to be found." Marcus helped her up and held her for a long moment while her small body leaned into his strong arms. Juno leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, saying nothing, but his eyes softer than before. The Ghostmaker turned away and returned to his screens without a word, as if the moment had never happened. They left the silent ship and returned to Juno's vessel, setting course for deep space. No destination, just movement, just distance, just time to think and heal and plan. Arya slept deeply for the first time since she could remember, wrapped in the same jacket that had started it all. Marcus sat beside her, watching her breathe, watching the stars move slowly beyond the glass, and thinking about choices and promises, and what it meant to protect something precious, even when the whole galaxy wanted to take it away. Juno walked in with a cup of steaming liquid and handed it to Marcus, his voice low and tired. "We're in deep now, brother, real deep. But I'm with you till the end." Marcus took the cup, nodded, and said quietly, "Then we keep going until we find the others, if they exist. She's not the only one, I can feel it. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for someone to come." And far across the stars, hidden behind veils of darkness and silence, other eyes opened, other minds stirred, other children, once hunted, once broken, now waking, now remembering, now listening for a voice that called them home. And that voice had just begun to rise. The ship glided through empty space, its engines low, its lights dim, its crew silent. As they moved between the stars, Arya sat in the main chamber, her eyes closed, her hands resting on her knees, her breath calm, but deep, her mind reaching out towards something far away. Marcus stood near the command console, checking systems, checking maps, checking for signals, but finding nothing, not even noise, not even dust. The silence outside was strange and heavy, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Juno leaned back in the pilot's seat, one foot on the console, a frown on his face, and a datapad in his hand. He kept scanning the nearby sectors, watching for any movement, watching for signs of life, but there was nothing until there was everything. Without warning, the ship's sensors screamed, red lights flashing across the dash, alarms echoing through the hull. Juno bolted upright. Marcus ran to the console, and Arya opened her eyes, already knowing what they would see before it appeared. 3 ships dead ahead, black and sharp and fast. They bore no markings, no signal, no call signs, only shadows in motion. "They found us," Marcus said, his voice low, his fingers moving fast across the console, setting shields, charging weapons, preparing for what he knew would not be a fight, but a storm. Juno cursed under his breath and pulled the ship into a hard turn, trying to find a gap, trying to run, but the black ships followed like hounds on a scent. Arya stood now, her coat falling from her shoulders, her hair lifting slightly, as if a breeze moved around her, her eyes locked on the view ahead, the enemy ships growing larger, closer, colder. Marcus looked at her and knew she was ready but afraid, and he said, "We can still run, we can still hide." But she shook her head and whispered, "They will never stop, not until I stop them." Juno flipped the switches and weapons lit up along the side of the ship. 2 turrets, 2 missiles, not enough, not against ships that hunted whole worlds, But they had no choice. The first shot came like a spear of fire slicing past their wing, missing by inches. Marcus returned fire, but the shot bounced off their shield, barely a scratch. The enemy ships spread out, surrounding them, pressing them closer to the edge of a red dwarf system full of debris, full of dead satellites, full of ghosts. Marcus shouted, "We go through the field. They won't follow us, and too risky." Juno grinned wild and slammed the throttle forward. The ship dove into the debris, spinning, dodging, scraping past old wreckage and broken stations. The black ship slowed, but kept coming slower, but still hunting. Inside, Arya moved to the center of the ship, the place where the power core pulsed deep below her feet. Her eyes closed again, her breath steady, her thoughts focused. She could feel them now, not just the ships, but the minds inside. Cold minds, sharp minds, minds made for hunting and breaking and killing. She reached out, not to attack, but to listen. Marcus felt the ship jolt again. Another hit, not fatal, but close. Juno shouted, "We lose engines, we're dust." She has to do something. Marcus turned to Arya and called her name, but she did not answer, not with words. Her body began to glow faintly, a soft light rising from her skin, from her hand, from her eyes. The black ships moved, and one faster than the others, weapons hot, ready to strike, ready to end it all. But then it stopped, just stopped mid-flight. No warning, no smoke, no blast, just silence. Then it turned slowly and fired not at them, but at one of its own allies. The second ship took the hit, spun out, and crashed into a large piece of debris, vanishing in a ball of flame. Juno shouted, "What was that? What did she do?" Marcus said, "I think she just reached inside his mind and flipped something." And Juno said, "That's not possible." And Marcus said, "Neither is she." The last ship hesitated now, unsure, its pilot confused, its sensors jammed, its mind touched by something it could not understand. Arya stepped forward, her feet light, her hands open, her voice like wind, "You do not belong here. Turn away or lose everything." And the last ship fired one final shot. The beam hit the side of their ship, tearing through the armor, slicing wires, sparking flames. Marcus flew backward, hit the wall, blood in his mouth, lights blinking, alarms screaming. Juno tried to steer, but the control burst in his hand. The ship rolled, spinning, burning, falling toward a large structure in the field. Arya screamed, not from pain, but from anger, her voice rising like thunder, her light flaring brighter, her eyes burning silver. And the enemy ship stopped again. This time, its hull cracked from within, its systems fried, its lights died, and it simply drifted dead and broken into the dark. Silence returned, only the hum of damaged systems, only the soft sound of breathing. Marcus pulled himself up, holding his side, wincing, blood on his hands. Juno groaned, smoke around him, cursing everything. Arya stood still, her body dim again, her strength spent, but her eyes clear. Marcus looked at her and said, "You stopped them." And she said, "No, they stopped themselves. I just helped them see." They drifted toward the structure, an old mining platform, abandoned and forgotten, but still half working. Juno managed to guide the ship into a soft crash against its docking arm, engines dead, shields gone, but alive, barely alive. Inside the wrecked ship, they began repairs. Juno working with one hand, Marcus limping, Arya quiet and thoughtful, watching the stars through the broken window, wondering who else was out there, wondering who else was listening. They had won not by fire, not by force, but by something older, something stronger, something inside Arya that even she did not fully understand. And now the enemy knew, and now the galaxy would whisper, a girl with silver eyes who turned ships to silence. But deep in the void, beyond the reach of any signal, a command was given by a voice hidden in shadow, a new order, a new weapon, a new fleet, and the hunt was not over, not yet, not ever. And Arya felt it in her bones, in her breath, in the way the stars pulsed around her. This was only the beginning, and the real war had just begun. The stars above the small planet shone brighter than usual, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting, listening. The winds moved gently across the tall grass of the valley, bending it like waves. And in the middle of that quiet world stood a girl who once shivered in a dark alley, now standing tall, her silver eyes looking toward the sky, wrapped still in a worn human military jacket too large for her, but never once removed since the day it was given to her by the man who changed everything. Arya no longer feared the cold, no longer feared the shadows that once chased her across systems. Her mind was stronger, her heart steadier, her thoughts clearer. The storm within her had become calm, and from that calm grew something powerful, something pure, something that could not be shaped by fear or hate or pain. She had trained every day since the battle at the edge of the stars. She had listened to Marcus, learned from him, followed his stories, his warnings, his lessons. Juno had stayed with them longer than he planned. The smuggler turned mentor patching up the ship, teaching her how to fly, how to read the hidden signs, how to move like a ghost through the noise of the stars. And he too had changed, not because of duty, not because of orders, but because of something he never expected to find in a broken universe: hope. They had built a place here, hidden and small, but alive, a place for those like Arya, the forgotten, the gifted, the hunted children from ruined planets, or broken ships, children who saw too much too early, who carried gifts in their minds and pain in their hearts. Marcus and Arya had found them one by one and brought them here, to a world off the maps, where no signal reached, no hunter followed, no enemy dreamed of searching. And they came quietly, they came afraid, but they stayed, and they learned, and they healed, and soon they began to believe again that they were not alone, that they were not weapons, that they were more than what the galaxy tried to erase. And in the center of it all stood Arya, no longer a girl lost in fear, but a voice, a guide, a symbol of what could be. Marcus watched her from the hill, his hair now touched with gray, his eyes still sharp, but softer, his hand resting on the hilt of a blaster he had not used in months. He smiled, quietly watching the children run across the field below, some laughing, some chasing light drones, some floating gently with the power inside them, and all of them wearing simple jackets made from the same fabric as hers, a new symbol born from an old memory. He remembered the day he first saw her, small and shaking, cold and alone in a city that never cared. He remembered the weight of the coat as he gave it to her, the way her eyes looked at him, not with hope, but with confusion, as if she had never seen kindness before. He remembered thinking he would help her for a day, maybe two, and then move on, but instead he found purpose again, something war had taken from him, something peace had not given back. Arya walked up the hill toward him, her steps quiet but strong, and she stood beside him for a while without speaking, just watching the others below. Then she said softly, "Do you remember the first time you spoke to me? You asked if I was all right, and I could not answer because I did not believe anyone really cared, but you stayed and you gave me this jacket, and you never walked away." Marcus nodded, his voice low. "I remember. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you would become. I just saw someone who needed warmth." She looked at him and smiled gently. "And now I try to do the same, to give warmth to others, to give them what you gave me." He placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You've done more than I ever could. You gave them hope, you gave them strength, you gave them a future, and I am proud of you, Arya, more than words can say." Below them, the children began to gather near the center of the field, forming a circle, preparing for the evening flame. A tradition Arya had started where each child would place a light into the air and speak one word, not a name, not a memory, just a word that carried meaning, something they wanted to hold on to, something they wished to become. As the lights rose into the sky one by one, glowing softly like stars being born, Arya stepped forward and raised her own light, but instead of releasing it, she held it for a moment and turned to speak to them, all her voice carried by the wind, soft but strong. "I was once alone, afraid, cold. I was once hunted, broken, forgotten. But someone gave me something simple, something kind. He gave me a jacket, not because I was special, not because he knew what I was, but because I was shivering, because I was a child, and that act changed everything." She looked at each face, young and wide-eyed, glowing with light, and she continued, "You are not forgotten. You are not mistakes. You are not weapons. You are voices and dreams and futures. And the stars are yours, not theirs, not the ones who try to erase you, not the ones who fear you." She lifted her light and spoke one word, hope, and released it into the sky, where it joined the others, dancing above like a constellation, being written in real time. And the children followed one by one, releasing their lights, their words filling the air like music: peace, strength, joy, freedom, courage, and more, each light a promise, each word a step forward. Marcus watched with tears in his eyes, not of sadness, but of pride and wonder, because he had seen war and loss and darkness. But now he saw something greater, something worth protecting, something worth believing in again, and it had all started with one choice, one moment, one jacket. And somewhere far beyond their quiet world, in the dark spaces between systems, whispers spread, not of fear, not of danger, but of light, a legend growing of a child who turned away from death, who became a flame in the void, who built a place where forgotten voices could rise again. And deep in a hidden corner of the galaxy, a man who once gave the order to erase her stood in silence, watching those whispers grow, and knew that the war he started had birthed something stronger than any weapon, something he could never silence. Because Arya was no longer running, and the stars were no longer quiet, and the future was hers, and the jacket still rested on her shoulders, warm and worn and full of memory, and the legacy of one simple act of human kindness would never fade from the stars again.